Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now, at the current moment, we are merely days away from the 250th YCS. So, I think it would be extremely cool if you guys had a kind of inside look at what's going through my mind right before one of the biggest events ever. And also, you can maybe gain some valuable input for yourself when entering the event, because while I may not be able to give you exactly what I'm playing, largely because I haven't decided, I can give you a good idea of what I'm probably going to do, and then how you can take similar approaches with your own decks. And then also, if the event is passed by then, we can use this to see how good my information was, see if I had the right idea, or if I was off basis. You know, it's very possible that I'm wrong. It happens all the time. And if it proved to be right, then maybe you can apply some of these ways of thinking moving forward. Anyways, before I continue, please make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below if you like these type of videos. If you want more discussions like these before events, and what else you also want to see on this channel, because I want to do a wide variety of stuff. Please also check out tsx1.com and use the code potato10 for great selection of sleeves. Those are the sleeves that I use at events, and I have zero regrets. They feel very similar to a PC white, and they are not nearly as expensive and scarce. Also, they're better quality control. So definitely recommend them. Anyways, let me get into the video. Okay, so let's talk about the actual decks and the meta. Now, on the screen right now, I'm kind of showing to you the 5 main things I'm expecting to see at the YCS in greater amounts. Despia, Kashtira, Labyrinth, Sprite, and Runic variants. Now, these aren't all the decks that exist or all the decks that can even do well. However, when I'm preparing for an event, you don't want to prepare for every single rogue deck in the world. So for example, Ninjas, Dark Worlds, those decks are not terrible, and they can absolutely beat you when you play against them. However, to invest a lot of resources into side decking or playing utility cards for them, it's not super relevant. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to keep it to the ones I expect to play a little more frequently at this YCS, and thus should put a little more effort into preparing for. So these are the 5 I do think will show up the most, and I think Kashtira will be the most represented, and I'm not sure what will be after that, if it'll either be Sprite or Runic. I would have said Runic a couple weeks ago, but following the events of YCS Peru, it seems a lot of people have shifted towards Sprite. They can go back to the deck they were playing before, they know well, and it has dropped in price as well, and it seemingly is solid and isn't weak to all the same utility cards that the other decks are. So it's grown a lot, whether it be the adventure version or the Melfi version. Not being a standardized version does make it a little bit harder to prepare, so you want to familiarize yourself with both ways that play. So are they ending on Toad Testudo, or the ending on the Melfi stuff that can make a Herald Darklight on your turn, or the Melfi that bounces a card. So both of those are important to look at, and I think those two will be the next most played decks that I'd expect to see. I think Runics are very solid because once they get going, they are very strong. You have a hard resource flow, there's constant draw 3s, which very few decks can keep up with. And the 2 main variants I'd expect to see would be the Plunder and Naturia. Definitely more Naturia than Plunder, but I felt like Plunder is worth talking about as it has been talked about more and more over the last few weeks, and I do think it is pretty solid because if people aren't prepared for it, it can be decent. And then giving your opponent the Jord token is pretty strong versus Kashtira. Not perfect, but it is solid. They both have something crazy to capitalize off of. I mean, this deck can also play Rivalry and do a lot of cool other combos that are a bit hard to explain in just one video. And then obviously the Naturia deck can put up stuff like Baron, Naturia Beast, which are very good. Naturia Beast specifically is something that I'm very scared of because the best utility cards right now are spells. At least I think so, at least. And spells do nothing versus Naturia Beast. So, I think the Runic deck's very good. I don't love Sprite, but I think they're okay. But these are the decks I'd expect next. Now, in my meta video after YCS Vegas, I did say that I thought the next most popular decks would be the Tier 1 decks would be Despia and Labyrinth. However, it seems as people prepare more for them, they have fallen off, which I did kind of predict with Labyrinth, but not as much with Despia. The more I tested and kind of saw it play, I did realize, however, that it is not quite consistent, and it still is fragile at other points of the combo as well. If you go for the Expulsion Lock, there are weak points there, such as Bell if you aren't able to get both of your targets banished ahead of time. And yes, sometimes it may have Mercurier, but it's not often enough for me to feel comfortable. It's too hard to prepare for everything with Despia, and that's why I think it's fallen off greatly. I don't think it's fallen off completely, and I also feel like it may see a bit of resurgence as due to its poor performance at Peru and over the last couple of weeks, people may start to neglect it a little more, and then with less targets on its back, it may be able to push through the only Ash that it's facing. As for Labyrinth, it could be similar. If people switch to more runic-based back removal, such as Cosmic Cyclone, then Labyrinth does get a step up. But I think that one is less likely. There still will be a lot of stuff like Lightning Storm and Evenly matched because they're good against other matches as well, not just Labyrinth, and that's part of why those cards were in my deck beforehand as well in other decks. So this one is a little worse for me. Now, if I'm choosing between any of these decks, I am leaning almost entirely towards Kashtira. But if the other deck that I'm slightly considering would be a runic variant, don't know which one I would lean to. I think I'd want to, figure it out probably the day before. But those would be the decks I am questioning bringing. I'd say it's probably a 99% chance I'm playing Kashtira, a 0.9% chance I'm playing Runics, and then a 0.01% chance that it's something else. I wouldn't know what it is, but I'd have to be convinced by somebody last minute that they have something crazy. It wouldn't be my own idea because right now I have none. So yeah, I think right now I'm leaning towards Kashtira. Now, if you recall back a couple weeks ago, I did say I'm not a fan of Kashtira because it's a little bricky, and then also it's weak to a lot of things. Now, the deck can play around those things, but in doing so, it becomes weak to other things. So you're almost tossing a coin each time you make an action with this deck. And that is not something I like, but it feels like because Kashtira exists in that way, it's created an entire format like that. So no matter what, you're going to be faced with those scenarios. Say you're playing Runics, for example, if your opponent's playing Cosmic Cyclones instead of Lightning Storms, it could be very annoying for you. You could still just get destroyed by something stupid like a single Cosmic. So it seems like all these decks right now are kind of weak and have glaring weaknesses that if your opponent has the right cards for, you will just get destroyed. So if I'm going to be making that choice, I wanted to play something that I felt like had the most ability to play my opponents if they prepared wrongly, and that is Kashtira, I think, can switch up pretty easily in game plans if I see what tech cards are playing game one, and then also it can play a high number of utility cards, and that was the other big thing for me. I think if utility cards are kind of what defines the format right now, I'd like to play a decent number of them, and while my build played 14 before isn't the highest amount possible, it is healthy enough compared to something like Runics that I have a lot more to fight than they would. So that is kind of why I'm leaning to Kashtira, and then I think a lot of people play rogue decks that suck against Kashtira, like Dark Worlds, and Rise Art's just insane. Like, the reason I was struggling this format is largely due to Rise Art, so if people think maybe Kashtira won't be that popular and play those decks, then you just get free wins. Every win matters at these tournaments. So that is currently how I feel about actual specific decks in the meta. But I think what's more interesting to talk about is the tech cards. So this is the list of tech cards that I could compile for myself. Maybe there's some more that I'm missing, but this is for the most part the things that you'd want to include in your main deck and your side deck for various reasons. Now, when we're deciding what we want to play, we want to first figure out what role exactly we're trying to fill. So I know that's a bit easier said than done, but say we're playing Kashtira, you could want more cards for going first. You could want something like Deflector, Judgment, or Ibly, but say you don't, and that's what I'd be inclined to do. I wouldn't want more stuff for going first. Then I would never even consider these cards as utility spots for main or side. If I do want more stuff for going first, then sure, but main point is figure out the purposes, right? So what matchups we're looking for, any cards we're looking to beat, and so on. So right now, the things I'm looking to beat the most would be the Kashtira Mirror. So Rise Art Pass and the Lock are both kind of concerning, whether it be 3-lock or 5-lock, although 5-lock isn't crazy common. And then also how to like to deal with the sprite cards that have been popping up more, and how to like to deal with the runic engines. So keeping that in mind, Evenly Matched has gotten a bit worse for me. I don't think it's very good versus the Sprite deck that can put up a Toad pretty often, or even a Carrot. It's not that hard for them to do. And the Mirror Match, losing your battle phase is kind of annoying. It is worse than other cards for sure. It's not unplayable, but I don't love it either. And then against the Runic decks, if they keep the Fountain up and you lost the battle phase, now you don't have a great way dealing with it unless you have something else. So this card that was in my deck before, I am no longer considering, at least for the main deck. If I do play it, it would be in the side deck for decks that it's more effective against, say, Labyrinth, Traptrix type decks. Now, that's like the biggest change for me, and I have to find something I want to replace it with. And now each time we enter event, we want to evaluate each card's efficacy against the main decks we're expecting. So Ash Blossom is one, for example, that has been under my eye a bit more, because originally it was extremely strong to play against Despia, a very popular deck in the format, and then it was solid versus Labyrinth, and it was okay versus Kashtira. Now we're expecting less of the other two decks, and the deck that is the most represented now is the deck, it's probably the worst out of those three from before. And in its place we have Runic decks, and we have we have Sprite decks. I think it's pretty bad versus Sprite, to be honest. It requires them to have a pretty weak hand for it to do anything meaningful, and I'd rather have another card almost always. But then versus Runic, it's okay. There are a lot of hands where it can be backbreaking, but then some other hands where it does not much. It feels similar to Kashtira, where it can be good, it can be insane, or it can be bad. And I don't love that it has a little bit of variance like that behind Ash Blossom, and they would almost consider me moving it to the side deck, as I can put it in for matchups that are better. However, this isn't something I'm sold on. Now, it's not just that we're preparing to beat other fields with it, we also want to prepare for other people's tech cards. And if you're expecting other people to follow the trend that I was doing before, playing stuff like Evenly Matched Lightning Storm in the main deck, then having stuff that's not face down is beneficial. So Ash Blossom there would be good, because if you get Evenly, you still have the Arise Heart up plus the Ash to defend yourself. And now that would fall in a similar boat as Saravis here, right? If we're playing Forbidden Lance to stop Book of Moon effects, Arise Heart, and all that, so Lance doesn't even stop that, then Saravis may be a decent replacement. Now, it doesn't beat Book of Eclipse, and that's probably the biggest one. However, it does stop other stuff as well, such as Fenrir targeting, it stops Big Eye targeting, it stops Arise Heart targeting, and it stays in the hand, which means if you get evenly matched, you can keep it in hand and not worry about it. You solve the out to Book of Moon. Obviously, being worse to stuff like Book of Eclipse is worse, though, so it does leave me a little unsure. If you're playing something like Small World, however, this could be a worthy addition, because it's level 7 and can bridge some of your stuff together, and it can also fill in the role of Lance if you're scared of a Book of Moon face down. So Sorvis is something that I have been thinking about. Now, so Ash is something that I have been questioning whether it deserves a spot in my main deck. Post side, though, I would want to address Despia to some degree, and no matter what, Ash will be in my deck because it is the best card versus Despia, and I will have that in there, if not for anything else, for Despia in the side. However, that doesn't mean it won't be in the main. It does have enough coverage and is decent enough of the time that it probably will be in the main deck. It's just you always want to constantly reevaluate every single card. Speaking of the other cards that I played for tech at Peru, I played the Book of Moon cards. I didn't play Lunar Eclipse. I probably wouldn't play it, but I just threw it in here, for example. Now, I think these cards are really good going first or second versus the mirror match, the Kashtira mirror match. Going second, they're solid, that you crack through fields. And then going first, they're good interrupts. And in fact, I think they're the best possible interrupts you can have for Kashtira. That being said, they aren't as good in other matchups. I don't think they're dead, because most of the time they can force an interrupt, but they can be worse than something else like a Kaiju or even a hand trap in some scenarios. I'm still leaning towards playing them because I feel like they're not dead in other matchups, and going first, they're honestly pretty good versus pretty much anything. I think they're so insane in the mirror match that it's still worth playing. And I've also seen so many people take the Book of Moons out of their deck that they're also taking Lance out. And if they're taking out Lance, that just makes this card even better. It is so hard to push through this card as is that I really want to have these in my deck. Now, that may be a mistake, but that's currently the way I'm seeing the format, and I think these are the best cards in the Kashtira mirror because they're useful in the most situations and strong in those situations too. That's where I stand with that. Those were all the main deck utility cards I played before. Now, what else has been on my eye, I guess? Well, if we expect a huge uptick in Rogue, it's not impossible to conceive that Shifter comes back into the main deck. It was really good before with Tier Elements because obviously this card is insane with graveyard decks. And if we're expecting a bunch of mirror matches, this card is not great. If this card is better versus Sprite, maybe I'd recommend it a bit more. However, I don't think it covers enough of the meta to warrant a main deck spot yet. Maybe that is naive, but I don't think it would be smart to do that at this moment. But yeah, drawing this versus Runic is nuts. Versus other decks is good too, and this card will definitely be in my side deck. At the very least, this card is insane for this deck. Other cards that have been popping up right now are something like Joel and Lockbird. Joel and Lockbird, I honestly don't love. A lot of people have really been liking it, but I feel like it's so dependent on how your opponent's hand plays out. There are too many times where this card does nothing. And then also often sucks in grind games drawing later on in the game. So because of that, I think it doesn't fit in line with this deck's game style, where it's kind of playing a slow grindier game. Even if it's not like that slow of a game, it's not exploding in the same way that the tempo for Draw and Lockbird matters. And in a similar fashion, Lancia can be like that as well. Now, something interesting to note is there has been a pop-up of Lancia being played against Kashtira. Now, if you are expecting your opponent to have a Lancia against you, and you go Unicorn and then Theosis on the Fenrir to add a guy from deck to hand, if they don't Lancia there, and you're just going to make a Rise Pass, you can add Scareclaw Kashtira instead of a Rise Heart, and then they can't Lancia you, and you'll get to the Rise Heart either way. Now, that being said, them Lanciaing in that position with the Rise Heart on the field is not that big of a deal, because you'll still have Fenrir and Unicorn up, and as long as you can back it up with like a Book of Moon, I'm chilling in the mirror match. I'm not that worried. So yeah, those tempo ones aren't my favorite. I think Shifter's the exception because it's just so insane. I don't think these are good enough to be in the same boat. Something else that has been popping up a lot recently, and something that I kind of wish I played before, was Gamma. So obviously this gets banished off the top of your deck. Sorry, if the driver gets banished off the top of your deck or if a Arena card, it sucks. However, I think it is a really strong card versus Sprite. The deck has often had a hard time versus Gamma unless it has multiple interruptions, because it both negates and gets the body off the field. And then if they don't have a body on the field, can't do blue, jet, whatever, and you know, that's rough for them. But I also think it's really good in the mirror match. Now, obviously, it's just strike, which is good. But if you can use any of your spells to force the Rise Heart trigger, and then you chain Gamma, you can make Omega, rip a card from their hand, still clear your field, and then get rid of the Rise Heart. Alternatively, if you're not playing Kashtira and you don't care about your field being clear, you can make Excel Stardust Dragon, and then bring back the Gamma and make Baron, which is fantastic. That being said, you should be preparing for this if you are a Kashtira duelist. This isn't some hidden tech. This is something that's been popping up more and more. You should be prepared to make Infinitrack Goliath under your Rise Heart a lot more often now than maybe you would have in the past, if you're given the opportunity. Now, given that that's a popular play, does that maybe encourage us to go for locking zones a little more, so our field's a little more diverse and spread out, and also banish the top cards of the deck? Maybe. It's hard to say exactly. I don't love the idea of this. There's other issues as well, because if they have the Fenrir up next to a Rise Heart while doing the Gamma, and you're playing Kashtira and they banish the Gamma now, or the Fenrir, or the driver, now you have a clogged body and you're almost locking yourself. So I'm a little curious if in Kashtira specifically this is the right card, because if those scenarios come up, this card does kind of fall apart. And then Gamma-ing on their first turn is a lot harder than it seems, because if you just do it on the Unicorn, they may be able to extend past that. That's probably the only way you can do that, because if you wait for something like Mind Hacker, they'll stand on a Rise Heart, and then that's kind of what you're trying to avoid. Or if they banish for a Rise Heart Big Bang, and then you Gamma there to try and stop them from triggering Shangri-Ira, if they have any other extender like Birth, they can special summon one out again, and then make Mind Hacker, which will still trigger everything, and you'll be kind of screwed. So I'm not quite sure how I feel about Gamma yet. It does seem very strong, especially in non-Kashtira decks, and it has a lot of promise, but I don't think it's entirely perfect yet, and there may be a little bit kind of against it right now. That being said, it is popping up in a lot of main decks even, such as Sprite main decks, because they play with Teleport, that I would be careful of this card if you are playing anything. Talking about breaking the field for Kashtira is an interesting subject, because there's been a couple school of thoughts. There is, of course, the Book of Moon ones, which are, more well-rounded. And then we also see stuff like Nibiru, Sphere Mode, Lava Golem versus stuff like Kaiju's Kurikara. These ones are interesting. Obviously, if your opponent's not summoning 5 monsters and going a Rise Pass, then Nibiru is bad. However, that's not something that inherently and you may say, everyone's going to copy me, they're going to go a Rise Pass, therefore you should be going for 5 combo, therefore you should be going for Nibiru again. But then you could continue this train of logic and keep going in a circle. And that's kind of the paradox we have with Nibiru right now. And I'm not sure what to do myself. I don't know if this card will even be in my deck, but it might not. Because trust me, you guys aren't independent thinkers, and neither am I even thinking this. When I have people come up and ask me, probably the most common thing I'm asked in the last couple days is, now that everyone's going Arise Pass, should I just play should I go for the combo, the lock 3 combo? Like, people still play Nibiru though, so I don't like love it, but yeah, I get asked that a lot. And the reality is, it's hard to predict. I don't have a good answer. If you could accurately predict people aren't playing Nibiru, then fantastic, but I don't think that's a safe assumption. You have people that are gonna continue that thought train even further, and then they're gonna stop at the Nibiru line of thinking and play Nibiru, or they may stop somewhere else and not play Nibiru. It's incredibly hard, and you're gonna have to make reads based on how your opponent plays, and how you've seen their deck game 1, for example. It's not easy. I'm gonna say most of the time I'm probably going into a Rise Heart. At least that's how I feel currently, but that may change as well. It'll be a lot of picking other people's minds and opinions as well. Now, it's important to note that before you enter a tournament, you want to have a main plan for what you're trying to do, because you can develop your tech cards around that. Because if you're going for a Rise Pass, you do want a lot more of your tech cards to be somewhat defensive. They can't be all breaking board type cards. For example, if you fill your deck with 12 Kaijus and going a Rise Pass, you could just get OTK'd. That's not good. So then you want stuff like Ash, Book of Moons, Mourner, to balance that out a bit. But if you are going for like heavier lock combos, and if Resolves you're chilling, then maybe you can play greedier board breaker cards that are worth going first. Now, on the topic of Kaijus have been seeming appealing because a lot of other decks are doing similar things where they put up one big body and they're kind of chilling there. And this includes stuff like Dragoon, Nat Beast, the Marincess cards, and the Cyber Setting Nister. These are all cards that are popping up a little bit more and more, and they are very hard to Kashtira to out. We identify the problem and we play solutions for them. Now, for a lot of those other issues, there are other ways to beat it, albeit very annoying, but that could warrant Kaiju seeing play. Now, if Dragoon and Nat Beast are the ones I'm biggest scared of, it doesn't have to be Kaijus. It could be Dark Ruler, for example. But that is something you do have to keep in mind, because it has been popping up more and more, and it is a bit of a problem for Kashtira to deal with. Now, if we don't play now to those decks, you do want to have somewhat of a plan in mind. The main plan you should be thinking of is try deck them out with Mind Hacker. So try hit perfect numbers, and if you can stick a Mind Hacker to put them down to pretty much nothing, use your births, your preparations to swarm the field, and then wall ups that you can deck them out. And I know that sounds very weird, but that can work. Identifying the win condition is important, and it is not fully lost. But yes, the Kaijus are very weird for me. Kurikara is kind of a middle ground, where if they're going for like the lock 3 combo, this card can be fantastic. But again, it does force a trigger to come out, so you have to use a spell to trigger the Arise Heart, which sometimes mean wasting a card or summoning a Fenrir. What I also don't love about Kurikara, and specific to my situation, is if I'm playing Kashtira, it puts a body on my side of the field. So that means it's hard for me to play after the fact, and obviously if I have to play before I use Kurikara, it's not completing the job of board breaker, so it's not very good there. Now, it's important to note that all these cards are weak to Ibli, so if we're scared of these type of cards, there's a very real chance we go back to playing Ibli, and it lets us play more aggressively with our cards and not be scared of Kaijus, Lava Golems, Kurikaras, or Nibirus, or even Gammas. And that would be kind of the reason to see Ibli back in, especially as we've seen Linger Evos drop off a lot from the extra deck right now. That being said, I'm not sure if I want to commit more cards for going first in this deck, because I feel like if you just say follow up, you're fine most of the time through this type of disruption. Now, cards that I don't think are very good right now are Contact C, as one for example. I think we're seeing a drop off in Despia. And if I'm picking stuff for Despia, I'd rather play Ash, and Bell's probably good enough for other decks as well that I'd be sticking with these. And there's a limit to how much you can play, so Contact C probably gets phased out at this point from being played. If you find you have a real weak spot versus Despia and you're very strong with other stuff, which I probably don't think exists, but say it is, then maybe Contact C still comes in here, but yeah. And then other hand traps as well. I just find that other hand traps like Veiler and Mourner typically low value, and I don't love them. I know, and Imperm as well. I know other people do really enjoy these, but for me they seem like I'd always have a book instead, or a proper board breaker like Dark Ruler or a Kaiju rather instead. So they seem like a middle ground that is just weaker in every regard, and that's not what I enjoy. Like, yes, you can use it a bit more often, but like, it's not that good. Sometimes Imperm gets there on Unicorn, but I don't like these sometimes and then crossing fingers that it gets there. Now, Imperm is in a little bit of a different situation than the other two, because you can use it on your turn as a way to fight through fields as well. However, there's the other attached downside of being a card you put face down. So if we are expecting people to play stuff like Evenly and Lightning Storm, it just gets caught in the crossfire. So it's, again, something I don't love. And I think if I'm looking for something that's both defensive and offensive, I want it to be usable from the hand, which is a lot to ask for, but I really don't think I'd want to be setting more cards in stack, because there's a fear with mine. If you have a Birth and a Preparation face down and you set another card, Evenly can be a bit annoying. Alright, so what are the tech cards have I not talked about right now? There's Pistols as well, which fall under Despia right now. And again, I think if you're heavily targeting Despia, then maybe this is okay, but there's probably better stuff, like, again, Ash Bell, even Contact C, that make this almost obsolete in the current meta. We can go heavy with the books and play Lunar Eclipse, but I don't think it's necessary. And it's worse for a Rise Pass as well, so it's taking the gamble of Nibiru with a lot less of the payoff, because you have to discard a card. It doesn't even clean up straight away. Change of Heart, Econ, and Mind Control. These are all cards that I played, or I considered playing-ish for Peru. And they were pretty good. Now, Econ is a great counter to Ibly, and they can also be used going first and interrupt. So I think between these three, I've been liking this the most, as it has versatility, especially post side. I'm expecting more Kaijus. It lets me tribute to Kaiju to act as an interrupt when I go first, and then it clears up the field so the Kaiju's not clogging it for later. So I have been liking Econ a lot, and going first as well. I mean, going second as well. Obviously, it's really strong against Kashtira. Now, it's met in other matchups, but sometimes it can be used to help clear up fields. And specifically dealing with Ibly is nice. I don't like to leave myself completely vulnerable to Ibly. As for Mind Control and Change of Heart, these are also solid, but I think the versatility that Econ provides as a quick play spell, and by tributing, makes it superior. And I think moving forward, I played one Change of Heart, 2 Econs. I'd probably just play 3 Econs. I think this card is better. So, as terms of back removal, we talked about in the previous section how if there's more Runic, we may want to play Cosmic. I'd probably put a mix of them in there and then side them in for different things. However, I'd probably still put Cosmic in versus Labyrinth to deal with Floodgates, but I would like maybe some Cosmics to help versus Runic, could be used going first or second. Now, that being said, they may have a Netria Beast or even a Baron next to it. Now, that being said, Runic Kashtira is great at establishing fields that cannot lose to any one card and require a multi-card setup to beat it. However, they are extremely vulnerable to those multi-card setups, say Kaiju Cosmic. Well, I think with a lot of utility cards in your deck, you can rely a little more on that. So if you throw in Cosmics, then play like something like Dark Ruler, these 2-card combos can completely end the duel, and it may as well play them. And then in some cases, they don't have the Beast up or YuGiOh first and have Cosmic. It is still good. So Cosmic is definitely something that I was not playing before that is worth consideration in the current format, and it would probably have to come at the expense of the other massive blowouts, especially given that we may see a drop-off in the Mono Labyrinth. Now, Chalice and Droplet were popular at the beginning of the format, but I feel like, again, these fall into a similar range of Mourner and Veiler. They are pretty low impact. Droplet specifically, maybe a higher impact, but it can't be used under Rise Heart, so don't love it and probably won't play it. Going back to Dark Ruler no more for a second, I actually been liking this card a lot more because it can kind of deal with the field for Rise Heart. It can deal with the Lock 3 combo decently as well. Even though you lose your zones, you can then clean up the rest, whether it be attack with a guy and then make a Zeus play. I think this card is solid, and it beats Nap Beast, and then also with Uptick and Sprite, this card is solid because it checks that. What I don't love is if you're playing the mirror match, it loses to Lance. But that's almost it. And then obviously it's not as good going first, but then again, neither was Evenly. So if I wanted to replace Evenly, the card I'm considering the most right now is either Dark Ruler or Kaijus. Dark Ruler also deals with Dragoon, which was another thing on my mind, as we've seen Labyrinth and Despia play that card, and this deck does not have a good answer to it. So, yeah. We do have an answer. It's Scareclaw Cash, but it's if they know that and keep it off the field, it can be a bit annoying. And then also we have Cross the Designator. So Elijah Green topped the regional with this in his Kashtira deck, and we've also seen it in a bit other Kashtira decks as well, but it has been popping up a bit more and more. And the theory is you can play all sorts of utility cards, like a whole menagerie, and you can also use them as normal. It'll be a lot more random what happens, but you still will have access to similar cards, and now you can also cross out any of your opponent's tech cards. This sounds nice in the mirror match, and it is. However, I don't love that playing it over like lands leaves you more vulnerable to stuff like runic cards. Something that we definitely would not play in our deck. That's probably the biggest thing for me. And then I don't know how good of a going first card it actually is if you're not playing the mirror match. Because say they don't hand trap you and they board break instead, or they just go Kaiju. This card sits there kind of dead, and it is just a card not helping. And if you're signing it out in anything that's not the mirror, then does it really deserve a main deck spot? That's my question. I think it's a bit of a gamble playing this card. It can pay off greatly, but it can also be less effective than something like lands in a lot of other scenarios. So I guess in the sense that the Kaiju lands is also pretty bad. So I'm not sure. That's an issue with lands I wanted to address as well that makes it a bit harder. Is Kaijus kind of make lands poo-poo. That happened to me once at Peru. But yeah, Crossout's definitely one to consider. I don't think it's bad by any means, and it is a card that I'm bringing with me in case my mind changes a little more in the direction of playing it. Currently, it is not in my deck list though, but it is one of the cards I'm the most on the fence about. So this is a card we've seen a little bit, Herald of the Abyss. This is single target removal, but doesn't actually target. So in theory, this card is kind of cool to clear fields, and then also plays around lands because the player has to send it to the grave, and it beats all these unaffected stuff. What I don't like, however, is it's a spell card, so it loses to Nap Beast. That's probably the biggest thing for me, is I am expecting Naturia Runic, and I don't want these tech cards that are bad versus Naturia Beast. So this card is not going to be in my deck, almost certainly, but yeah. So Super Poly, Upsec and Sprite. This card is fantastic for Sprite. Does that mean Super Poly comes back into play now? If you really need something for Sprite and you can, like, if summoning Garura is good for you, then maybe. But from a Kashtira perspective, summoning Garura clogs my field, so this will not be in my deck. So, and then we got the Triple Talents cards. Now, Triple Tactics Talents is obviously good versus the Arise Heart Pass. If you can force out a spell, you can either steal it or draw two, or from hand. I mean, obviously all are fantastic. I don't like, however, that it requires one other card with it. But given you have a lot more utility cards and you are playing board breakers, maybe this card does have merit again. I don't love, though, that if you have a Book of Moon, specifically utility card, and they don't have any other effects, that you can't actually use this. So this one's okay. And then oftentimes it's not great going first. It's not great into Nap Beast. And it's okay in a Sprite. That leaves me thinking this card can also be a bit of a gamble and a bit high roll. But when it's nice, it's nice. So that's currently how I feel about Talents. And by extension, Thrust feels very similar, because I feel like most of the time this card is getting used to get something like Talents. And I feel like they are both okay right now, but don't really have exactly what I'm looking for. Barrier. I think it is not good in the mirror match. I think it is very, very meh in the mirror. It's mostly used against other decks. But as far as going first cards go, it is solid. I do overthink it is worse than Magic Deflector. I think Magic Deflector is the best going first trap card you can play. It's Ibly and Deflector are the two I'd consider. I would not play Judgment or Barrier, especially given the drop in Despia. And it'd be good. This stops Field Spell, Birth, Cosmic, Book of Moon, Book of Eclipse, Forbidden Lands, Crossout, Runic cards. It's very strong. So I'd consider playing Deflector. Adventure cards too, it stops. And then I think Ibly's probably stronger, but it's a bit more of a commitment for the extra deck, and then also uses your normal summon. I think that covers all the tech cards, and it gives you kind of an idea of how I stand on each of these before the tournament. But currently, the way I'm leaning would probably look something very similar to my Peru deck in the main, but I would not play Evenlies. It would either be Kaiju or Dark Lunamore instead in the main to adjust for the new Sprite meta. As far as the side deck goes, I would absolutely cut Contact Z. The card is not going to be in my deck almost for sure. And there may be something like Gamma in its place. There may be Cosmics now. There may also change the rest of my back row removal lineup in the side deck. And then I also may probably swap the Ninja Heart for enemy controller. There also is a good chance that Ash is not in the main deck. Not a good chance. There's a small chance, not a good chance. But it's a non-zero chance that Ash is no longer a main deck card for me. I hope you guys value my opinions of all these cards. And keep in mind, this isn't a genuine way I'm thinking. This is currently, it's going to be the Wednesday before the YCS and the 250th. And opinions can change in the next 36 hours before we have to, or 48 hours before we have to submit deck lists. So if it's not exactly what I say, understand, but this is actually how I'm feeling right now, and hopefully you can use some of this information to either apply forward to other events or to help yourself figure out what to do for your 250th yourself. Anyways, I will catch you guys next time. Peace.